All right, so with the time left here on today's show, going to run through some of the college football games that we didn't get to on the segments here earlier on in the week. And one game we didn't really talk about too much, Georgia Southern and South Alabama. Game tonight, South Alabama down to a 10-point dog in that one. That line opened 13.5, so it's been very steady South Alabama money here over the course of the week. Some people kind of selling their stock a little bit in Georgia Southern. And, you know, to some degree, I understand the line move. I understand that Georgia Southern has been a disappointment here so far this season. But look at the teams they've played. They play at LSU. Obviously, you're not going to do much with an LSU team that's much better than people thought coming into the year. They play at Minnesota. It was a game they lost by 3. Very easily could have won. Didn't have Shy Wirtz, their quarterback, but they also got outgained by almost 200 yards in that game. So very misleading score based on some turnovers and things of that sort. Wirtz comes back against Louisiana. Georgia Southern outgained by almost 200 yards again. But Louisiana, really, really good team in the Sun Belt. One of the best rushing teams in the country. They're a lot better than people expected also. So I think Georgia Southern has just kind of run into a happenstance of occurrences here where they play LSU, who blows them out. LSU's better than we thought. Minnesota, had some bad turnovers in that game, had some other weird things go on. But Minnesota still, tough road game, Big Ten opponent, long trip from home. Louisiana last week at home, Louisiana's just a better team than we thought. Now you've got a Georgia Southern team. Yeah, I get it, short week. But also for South Alabama here, they've got to try and defend this gimmicky option offense. It's a short week for them. They have not played well the last 3 weeks. They've only scored, 26 points in their last 3 games. I think it's a tough spot to like South Alabama here. Again, I understand the line move. I understand why some people are down on Georgia Southern. But if you're going to give me a 10 flat here in this game, and even some 10s with reduced juice out there in the market now, I may have to look at Georgia Southern. Even though my line is 9.5 here, I just think it's so tough to prep for that Georgia Southern scheme with such a quick turnaround like South Alabama has. As we look over at Saturday's card here, some interesting games early on the board. USF, a USF team that I think is just absolutely terrible. I think Charlie Strong is going to be fired from that job as well. They're a 10.5, 11-point favorite against UConn. Right on my number here. I have USF an 11-point favorite, and I'm happy about something like that because when it involves a team like UConn or a team like USF that's just outright terrible, I'm happy to be on the number because then I don't have to give that game too much of a second thought. However, when you look at South Florida here, when you look at this situation for them, 1-3 on the season, and you look at the rest of their schedule, it's tough to find another win. They host BYU next week, at Navy the following week, at East Carolina the week after that. Maybe that's their best shot at another win. But then Temple, Cincinnati, Memphis, all at home, and then UCF on the road to finish out the year. They don't have many more cracks at a win. This is a game that they absolutely have to have. And for UConn here, yet every game is a tough one to try and get a win for them. Couple of blowout losses here. Did play well against Illinois in week 2, but that was a game where, when you really dig in and look at the box score for that one, Illinois, both teams with 3 turnovers. UConn had 0.3 yards per carry rushing. Illinois is just not a very good team. So I think this is one where if you have to play it, maybe you're in some kind of contest pool where you have to pick every game or something like that, it would have to be USF for me just because there has to be this level of self-awareness that, look, boys, we may not win another game this year. And the coaches aren't going to say that, but the players are going to say that as they look at the schedule. And this is one of those instances, again, where if South Florida goes up to Stores and loses the game outright or doesn't play very well, you've got to lower South Florida again. Because situationally, this is as decent of a spot as they're going to get, especially in this big of a road favorite role. And if they don't play well, and if, God forbid they lose the game outright, I'm going to have to lower them quite a bit. And I feel like I'm already pretty low on them anyway. So, again, even if these are games that you're not interested in betting, and there will be a lot of them over the course of the season, consider the implications of what certain outcomes mean. If a team is in a bad spot and wins big, that says a lot about them. If a team is in a bad spot and loses, maybe it doesn't say as much about them. But if a team is in a good spot and loses, that says a lot. So keep those things in mind here as you go throughout the rest of the season because, we still have 8-9 weeks left of the regular season here. So we're still going to find out a lot about these teams as we go forward. And even these throwaway games can tell us a lot. Boston College and Louisville, game that we didn't really touch on here this week. My line's Louisville -4, the line in the market. 5.5 out there, give or take. A lot of people down on Boston College here so far, and you can certainly understand why. It has not been a good look for Steve Adazio's team here so far this season, and yet they're 3-2. Louisville, the talent was there. They quit last year on Petrino. Seems like they're playing a little bit better here this season. Seems like they're playing with a little bit more oomph, a little bit more attitude with Scott Satterfield, but I think this is one of those spots where I'd be worried about Louisville going out there and covering a number. There are 2 wins on the year, Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky is not a team that I've thought very highly of the last couple of years. They did hang in there quite well with Florida State last week, but you've got to learn how to win, and then you've got to learn how to cover. And I think Louisville has to relearn how to win after the damage that was done to that program last year. And, of course, the loss of a player like Lamar Jackson doesn't really help. But I think they have to learn how to get margin in a game like this. So I think I would lean Boston College here. If it gets up to 6, maybe I'll take a look at Boston College. If it got all the way to 6.5, I'd probably have to make a play on the Eagles here. But I think this is one of those spots where Louisville, they have to prove it to me. It's one thing to lose close and be competitive. It's another to go out there and cover a number in a favorite role against a team that, by and large, if you look coming into the season, people would have said that Boston College would have been a road favorite here probably. Or at the very least, the game would have been a pick'em. So I think there's a little bit of overreaction in the marketplace within this line. So do like Boston College a little bit. Again, if it got to 6 or 6.5, I would certainly like it more. Game 315, 316 here, North Carolina and Georgia Tech. I've got North Carolina a 7-point favorite in this spot. The line's all the way up to 10.5 now. I think this is a tough situation for North Carolina. You're coming off of the near miss last week, going for 2 against Clemson, not getting it. You do have a Georgia Tech team that's in complete disarray right now. But when you look at that Georgia Tech box score from last week against Temple, the yardage was pretty close. I know Georgia Tech only scored 2 points, but the yardage was pretty close in that game. And again, I think North Carolina getting a lot of respect here for playing a bunch of single-digit games, all their games this season decided by 6 or fewer points. They're 2-3 on the year. They've had some fourth-quarter comebacks, some different types of things. I guess when you look at the injury situations for Georgia Tech here, down a wide receiver, down their center, so maybe need to make a point and a half adjustment for some injuries for the Yellow Jackets here. So I guess my line probably a little bit light. But again, I think this is a tough spot for North Carolina. Can they go and blow out Georgia Tech? They absolutely can. Georgia Tech in that state of transition, changing everything on the offensive side. This could be a game that gets away from Georgia Tech very, very easily. But also, for North Carolina, what is their mindset? How many times can you keep coming up to the plate and not just swing and miss a few times? Again, all 5 of their games decided by 6 or fewer points. That's a lot for a young team with a freshman quarterback, new head coach, new coordinators. That's a lot of emotion to put out here the first 5 weeks of the season. So maybe this isn't a spot to fade North Carolina just because Georgia Tech really is that bad. But as we go forward here for North Carolina, they do get a well-timed bye next week before going on the road to Blacksburg. But Duke, Virginia, Pitt, NC State the rest of the way. NC State game coming after playing Mercer, so a little bit of a bye before that game. But I think as we go forward here, we may find some spots to go against North Carolina. So maybe we root for North Carolina to win this game in lopsided fashion, but then you'll look for some opportunities to go against them as we go forward. Not a game I'll have any action on, but still an interesting handicap because you kind of look at it and say, well, I can only go North Carolina or nothing here. But as you start breaking down the context around the game for the Tar Heels, I think it's a very tough bet to make either way in that one. Purdue and Penn State, we touched on this game very quickly with Brad, just to simply look at the adjustments to this number. I mean, I've got Penn State a 21.5-point favorite here in this game in my power ratings, and I'm 7 points off from the market. So maybe I've underestimated what Penn State has done the last few weeks. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think maybe I've underestimated the injury impact for Purdue, even though I already moved them 8 points. So maybe it's a Purdue team that people just kind of expect to quit on the season a little bit. I know Nick Holt hasn't worked out as a defensive coordinator. The returns on Jeff Brom are kind of hard to figure out with all the injuries, but I couldn't lay this big of a number with Penn State. I think Purdue has more pride than that. If I had to do something, again, if I was in a pool picking every game, Purdue plus 28 and a half would be the side. But again, one of the luxuries here of this business is that you don't have to bet on every game. And that's one that I think we just don't have to bet on. Maryland and Rutgers is a fascinating game here because you've got a Maryland team that was riding high after 2 weeks. They get that blowout of Syracuse, and then reality really smacked them in the face. And then last week, they cancel classes, a lot of fanfare for that game on Friday night in College Park, and they lose 59-0. Rutgers fires Chris Ash. And this was a bad team anyway. And if you had questions about Chris Ash coming into the season, you should have fired him back in January or even in December. Doing it now, I guess you don't want things to snowball any further, but also you're Rutgers. And look, if I'm the administration at Rutgers, I'm asking Paul Johnson if he wants to coach. Or I'm trying to see if Willie Fritz will be my guy next year. I want to run some sort of gimmicky offense where I can maybe win 5, 6, or 7 games a year, kind of pull a Georgia Tech, because they can't compete in the Big Ten. They were a grab by the Big Ten to have some kind of presence out there in that New York, New Jersey market for basketball and for conference tournaments and whatever else. Rutgers needs to go get an option guy. They need to go out there and try something dramatically different. Go get Ivan Jasper from Navy or something like that. Run the option. Give yourself a chance to at least be competitive because right now you can't be competitive. And this game, I wouldn't touch this game with anybody's money because I have no idea what to think about Rutgers, about what their mindset is. And also for Maryland, you got some quarterback questions. You've got Mike Loxley questions now at this point in time too. Brutal game. I don't see an edge either way. Line coming down a little bit from 13. I get that with the skepticism about Maryland, but what an ugly game to try and figure out there in Piscataway this weekend. Oklahoma State and Texas Tech. Oklahoma State up to a 10-point favorite. And, for Texas Tech, obviously I underestimated Alan Bowman and what his loss means to the Red Raiders. We'll see if they play a little bit better here this week. But Oklahoma State, dual threat quarterback now in Spencer Sanders. Chuba Hubbard's running all over everybody. It's tough to like Texas Tech in this spot, but it's also tough to lay 10 with Oklahoma State. Coming off of such a big resounding win, now they go on the road to Lubbock. A difficult game. I think there are a lot of difficult handicaps in college football this week. That's a game that I kind of looked at right away and sort of scratched off the page a little bit. And again, I probably didn't adjust enough for Bowman because my line's only 7 here. Bowman maybe more of a touchdown difference than the 4-point difference I originally gave it during the bye week. But still, this is a game I just don't have a whole lot of interest in. Eastern Michigan and Central Michigan. Michigan MAC Trophy game here. 335, 336. Eastern Michigan, 6.5 point favorite in this one. My line on this game here, Eastern Michigan -7. So it is moving towards my number. And for Central Michigan here, it's very tough to get a read on this team. They had the quarterback injury to Quentin Dormady. Then they lose Jonathan Ward, their top running back. And you kind of wonder, okay, what happens to this team? First year with Jim McElwain, can they rally? Can they circle the wagons? And they played one hell of a game against Miami a couple of weeks ago. And you look at a game like that and you sort of ask yourself, okay, well, does that say more about Miami? Is Central Michigan just a little bit grittier than we thought? Or was that just a game that they really had a lot of interest and incentive in? I don't know. I think it's really tough to say. And then last week, did outgain Western Michigan. Now, of course, they were getting shut out through 3 quarters. Western Michigan kind of goes into a prevent a little bit. Jonathan Ward back, has 100 yards on the ground. Central Michigan had 31 first downs in that game. They had 3 turnovers, so some bad turnover luck for them. Is this line too high now with Eastern Michigan? For Eastern Michigan, coming off of a close game that they probably should have lost against Central Connecticut State. And then now you get Central Michigan, a team that's not going to roll over for you. So my line is 7 in this game, but I've kind of got to lean to the Central Michigan side. I think they may be better than we realize. I think beating Akron by 21 was impressive for them. Going on the road and playing with Miami was impressive for them. Last week, the turnovers played a problem against Western Michigan. And again, maybe some cosmetic touches on the scoreboard late in that game. But you look at their first 2 drives. They move the football to about midfield, get picked off. Western Michigan scores a touchdown, you're down 7-0. Move the football inside the Western Michigan 10, gets stopped on downs. Western Michigan goes downfield, kicks a field goal. And it was just that kind of day. They gave up. They had the fumble in the second half. They gave up a touchdown off of that. They were lucky that the pick didn't come back to burn them. But 14 Western Michigan points off of actual takeaways, another 3 points off of a turnover on downs. They moved the football around halftime, turn it over on downs again. So for Central Michigan, I think they played better than that final score would indicate last week. Maybe like the chips a little bit here in this spot against Eastern Michigan, plus the 6.5 if you can find one. Again, looking to go against my numbers a little bit because I think Central Michigan may be a little bit better than I've given them credit for here so far. Troy and Missouri, 339-340. Missouri, 24.5-point favorite here. This line was up in the 26 range earlier on in the week. I don't know what to think about this game. My line's 22, so maybe a little bit of line value on Troy earlier on in the week. I don't know what to think here because you've got a Troy team that does look to be down a little bit this season. And maybe it's because they don't have Neil Brown. It's probably because of some of their offensive losses. They give up 50 points last week to Arkansas State. Did score 43 of their own, but they've given up a lot of points here in 2 of their games against real opponents. Played Campbell and Akron in the other 2 games. Missouri has a reputation for beating up on teams like this. They have a reputation for going out there and dominating inferior competition. And you look here, since that Wyoming game where they had some very unfortunate turnover luck, 38-7, 50-0, 34-14 against South Carolina. South Carolina team, I think, is pretty decent here this year. So as much as it pains me to say this, because I don't like laying big numbers, it would be Missouri or nothing for me here, simply because this is what they do best. And Troy, I think, is down a little bit from where they've been the last couple of years. And they have this reputation of being a very solid Sun Belt team, and they could be when all's said and done. But I think they're down just enough that Missouri can go out there, hang a big number, have some fun in this game before they get back into SEC play. 341-342 here, Liberty and New Mexico State. Really interesting game for a variety of different reasons. For the first one, these 2 teams played each other twice last year. Both independents, both set their own schedules, both play whoever will play them. They also play twice this year. So this is the game in Las Cruces on November 30th. They'll play over in Lynchburg, Virginia. So we'll have 3 data points by that November game of these 2 teams playing each other over the last 2 years. So that's kind of interesting. I guess it's a long travel spot for Liberty. I agree with this line moving down. It was 6 earlier in the week. I've got this line Liberty minus 2.5 on the road. So I agree with the line move coming down here. Maybe a lean to New Mexico State at the 5. But New Mexico State, I think it's a tough spot for them because they played their rival in New Mexico not that long ago, a couple of weeks ago. They've just had some weird travel, some weird situations here so far. So I think it's a game I'm going to stay away from, even though my line does suggest that New Mexico State may have a little bit of value. How about this Washington and Stanford game? Game 351-352. Do you remember when this was a premier must-watch type of game? And now Washington is a 17-point road favorite in Palo Alto. Biggest home underdog role in this series since 2004. It's the biggest home dog role for Stanford in over a decade. November 2008, when they played USC, was the biggest underdog role for them. So, yeah, you talk about maybe wanting to play against some outliers from time to time. But do you really want to take Stanford here? I was on Stanford last week, got lucky to escape with a push. It's not the same team. This is the worst team David Shaw's had in a very long time. And Washington is one of those tough teams because they've got great talent, but they're not flashy. They don't play like a top 15 team, and that's how you wind up losing to teams like Cal. So I don't really know how to rate Washington here at this point in time. I only have this game 12.5, but obviously the line moving against me. The market likes Washington here in this one, so I'm not going to step in front of it. I'm not going to take Stanford in this spot. But again, how the mighty have fallen with Stanford. Biggest home dog roll in over a decade for them here in a game that used to be lined very, very closely. So again, sometimes, and it can be tough too, when you talk about adjusting your power ratings and things of that sort, when you've got a name brand team and they're just not very good, you try to dig in, you try to hold on a little bit and say, okay, well, I know the talent is still there. And then you wind up getting into a situation where I appear to be with this game where I just need to lower Stanford more. And maybe up Washington a point or two. But I just need to lower Stanford more. And that will happen. And it is one of the hard things of adjusting power ratings, that you have a team with a reputation. You want to give them that credit, but maybe it's just not justified here for this season. Illinois and Minnesota. This is a game I played earlier on in the week. Caught Minnesota minus 13.5. My line on this game here is 17. And I think Minnesota is a team that you want to have on your radar. I think they're kind of figuring it out. And more importantly, I think Tanner Morgan is kind of figuring it out here this season for the Golden Gophers. Because one of my big worries about this team has always been offensive efficiency. The defense hasn't played that well this year, but offensive efficiency has been a concern. For Tanner Morgan, 10-2 touchdown interception ratio, 73% completion percentage. The running game hasn't been great. He's kind of overcome a pretty bad running game here. The offensive line hasn't played well for Minnesota. Morgan's been sacked 15 times on the year. But I don't think much of Illinois here. And I don't think much of a lot of things with Illinois. They got miserably outgained by New Mexico. They lost to Eastern Michigan. They struggled against UConn. And that win in week 1 against Akron, where they really dominated the game, just means nothing at this point in time. I know they're on some extra rest, but I took Minnesota here in this one. I got the 13.5. At 14, again, obviously you're giving up kind of a key number there. But I had to take Minnesota here this week. That is a game I do kind of like a little bit. If you find a 14 reduced juice or a 13.5, something like that. A couple more games I want to touch on here with you real quickly. Marshall and Middle Tennessee is an interesting game because Marshall was a touchdown favorite, now down into the 4 range. And we just talked about how good Cincinnati looked against Marshall last week. I'm looking around here. I don't see a whole lot of substantial injury issues for Marshall or anything like that. Certainly they do have some guys that are a little bit banged up here at this time of the year. But that's a pretty telling line move, especially early on in the week, to the magnitude that it was. If there is a Marshall injury, I apologize. I haven't seen anything listed out there in any of the sources that I check out. But keep that in mind because, there can be some injuries that are just a little bit more difficult to find than others. But that's a line move that really stood out to me early in the week, very sharp in nature. Again, could be injury related, but maybe people just thinking that Marshall's not that good of a team here this year, judging by what happened to them with Cincinnati last week. Finally, UTSA and UTEP. Not a great game by any means, at all whatsoever. Down there toward the bottom of the board here, 8 o'clock kickoff in El Paso. But both of these teams at 1-3. And when you look at the chances for wins the rest of the way, few and far between. UTEP, 2 wins in their last 28 games. It's been a long time for the UTEP Miners that they've been a relevant college football program. And this is a spot for them. And I understand their only win this year against Houston Baptist, and quite frankly, they didn't play particularly well in that game. Actually, they did have 500 yards in that game, but they gave up 413 yards to Houston Baptist. It was a close game late. This is a circle the wagons type of spot for UTEP, I think, because this is their best shot at a win the rest of the way. And for UTSA, it's probably their best shot at a win too. So you should get a fully motivated effort from both of these teams. And we do see UTEP here get bet into a 1.5-point favorite. My line actually has UTSA -3 in this one, but the sharp money is on UTEP. There's no public investment or interest in that game at all whatsoever. I think those line moves are interesting. And I'm not going to take UTSA here, despite maybe a little bit of value on my numbers. It would be UTEP or nothing for me here because you've got to respect the line move like that in a game with that lack of magnitude. So to see UTEP a 1.5-point favorite here or 2.5-point favorite is pretty telling, and I think that's the side that you would have to look at in that real barn burner of a game there.